In this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, author Michael Sims joins us to answer the question that's on everyone's mind.
Why did you think you had something new to add to a topic that seems to have been plowed to death?
And in attempting to answer that, Sims digs down and gives us what he calls
a close-up personal version of the story, in a sense, before he became Conan Doyle.
All this and much, much more ahead on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere 117.
Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wes Express, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wesexpress.com, and the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 117, Arthur and Sherlock.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Well, you're here again. I cannot believe it. And so are you, Bert. You made it back. Well, this is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
Yes, you are, and I'm Burt Wolder.
And we'd just like to take a moment and celebrate the fact that you took the time out of your busy schedule to plug in some earbuds or throw on some headphones or put us on speaker and listen to this fine show.
Yes, and little did you know that we have now layered lots of crazy glue into our podcast so that you're not going to be able to move for the next hour.
Man, this is really taking hold. This is going to be a problem when I need to use the restroom.
Yeah, well, you know, that's the thing about digital content. It's sticky.
Well, this is going to be quite a show. We've got Michael Sims with us, the author of the book Arthur and Sherlock. You may be rolling your eyes and thinking, "Oh my God, not yet another Sir Arthur Conan Doyle biography." But that's what we thought until we read it, and then our opinions were drastically changed, and our opinions were changed even further after hearing Michael speak about it. So fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be a good one. And while your seatbelts are fastened, what a great time to pull down that tray table, pop open that laptop, and get on over to ihearofsherlock.com and do a couple of things. One, press that Patreon button or the PayPal button. If you would like to support us on a regular basis, if you'd like to show us some level of gratitude for what we do, some level of congeniality and co-support, because it takes money to host the files, it takes money to send emails out, it takes money to promote our material to make sure it reaches the most number of people. And Patreon or PayPal are both a good way to do that, to be part of Team iHose.
I like that. And if you don't do that, friends, I'm going to call the flight attendant over and tell him or her that you're not being a good camper on this flight.
Uh-oh.
Wind up, in the baggage compartment pretty quickly.
Well, while you're there, you can pick up your phone and call us at 774-221-READ. You like that segue?
I like that segue, except, you're supposed to be in airplane mode.
Oh, well, in that case, connect to Wi-Fi and send us an email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. Head to any of the social networks and just look up I Hear of Sherlock. And, of course, feel free to leave us a comment on the show notes. Show notes for this episode can be found at ihose.co/ihose117.
Yes, and leave us a review. Come on, folks. It wouldn't kill you. It wouldn't kill you. Leave us a review on iTunes. And you could find that by going to bit.ly/ihearofsherlock. It's easy peasy.
Sounds good. You know what else is easy?
What?
Visiting wesexpress.com.
The ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex is getting ready for the spring tourist season at Stonehenge. This year's summer solstice is June 21st. Plenty of time for us to pave over the Long Barrow roundabout for a new car park. But you will leave no stone unhinged until you get your copy of The Illustrated Speckled Band, the original 1910 stage production by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, edited by Leslie S. Klinger, bringing Conan Doyle's script together with long-lost photographs documenting the original production scene by scene. It's Conan Doyle's personal vision of Sherlock Holmes in words and pictures for a mere $19.95. Geniuses of countless nations have told their love for generations. But, darling, when I think of you, every aged phrase is new. In this romantic spring, reach for the pleasure only a volume from the West Express can provide. Choose yours today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to get ourselves away to Wessex and back again, of course.
Yes, those people are so busy.
They are.
Busy,
they are
busy.
indeed. And, that's the same team that is responsible for publishing the Baker Street Journal. I don't know if people are aware of that.
Isn't that a conflict of interest?
Why would that be?
Well, if you had two interested people in the same room and both were interested in the same thing, that would clearly be a conflict of interest.
No, if both were interested in different things.
Mm.
Well, either way, you're here because you're interested to hear this interview with Michael Sims. And, hey, so are we. This is going to be a barn burner. And, the reason I can say that is because, well, we've heard the interview.
But how could that be? It hasn't happened yet.
Oh, but believe me. You know who says that? Believe me, folks. This is a great interview.
It is a great interview.
But it's great because Michael is a true Sherlockian, and he is an astounding author. And we'll share with you his bona fides in just a moment. But this is a guy that has been going to Sherlockian Scion meetings, who has been involved with some of the conventions and whatnot, has studied the scholarship. So he's not coming to it as an outsider. Michael, of course, is the author of another fine book, The Story of Charlotte's Web. And that's a book about E.B. White, the author there. And the Washington Post and the Boston Globe, other venues like that, chose that as a best book of the year. And then, of course, there's Adam's Naval, which was a New York Times notable book and Library Journal best science book. And he also wrote The Adventures of Henry Thoreau. So when you're wandering in the woods sometime, take a copy of that with you and perch yourself under the trunk of a tree and curl up like Henry Thoreau would and enjoy that. But Michael also edits the Connoisseur's Collection series of Victorian anthologies, including The Dead Witness, about detective stories. And he also edited the Penguin Book of Victorian Women in Crime and the Penguin Book of Gaslight Crime. Of course, his Sherlockian pastiche, The Memoirs of Silver Blaze, appears in the Anthony Award-winning anthology In the Company of Sherlock Holmes, edited, of course, by Laurie R. King and Leslie S. Klinger, whom you heard recently on the show. Michael's writing has also appeared in the New York Times, New Republic, the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Washington Post, the Baker Street Journal, and many, many more. And he lives in Western Pennsylvania with his wife and his son. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, so have we. You know, we've got your book, Arthur and Sherlock, in hand. And first of all, I have to say, it's a handsome volume.
They did a good job. I'm so happy with it. Since I didn't do it, I can brag about it.
No, it's that lovely railway carriage scene, I think from Silver Blaze, where Watson and Holmes are in the smoking car, and of course Holmes has the famous deerstalker cap on, and he's leaning across, sketching something out in the palm of his hand to Watson.
Yes, and it seems so iconic, but also I told them, if you set this, I really begged for the illustration, and I said, if you set this up with the title just right, the name Arthur will go with Watson somewhat, and Sherlock will be there, and it will be as if Sherlock is telling his creator his story.
Interesting.
And the designer said, ooh, I like that.
Well, let's talk about the title for a moment, because as you know, there are a lot of publications out right now regarding Sherlock Holmes. There's another one from Holmes to Sherlock. Now we've got Arthur and Sherlock. There seems to be a recent wave of calling Sherlock Holmes in a familiar way by his first name. Is that part of your intention here, is to kind of move along with these modern mores? Actually,
with my usual perception and foresight, I was completely unaware of this trend. I wanted the name Arthur in there to emphasize that this is going to be a close-up personal version of the story, in a sense, before he became Conan Doyle, before he was known at all. And then the editor suggested to parallel that with Sherlock, and he said there's no more distinctive word in the world than Sherlock, and to pair the two. And then he also suggested the subtitle, because I had come up with 109,000 subtitles that I rejected.
What were some of the ones you rejected?
Oh, God. I can't remember. Unfortunately, I have suppressed all that. I remember one of the subtitles I suggested for my book about Henry David Thoreau, which was how a godforsaken layabout and job quitter eventually amounted to something. And they vetoed that.
Oh, I like that a lot.
It is a mouthful, though.
Well, yes, but it's truth in advertising. Which
well, you talk about up close and personal, and I think that really defines the book. You know, from the beginning of the book, from your introductory remarks, from the preface, you really do something remarkable, which is particularly for folks like us, you know, that have been interested in Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle for a long period of time. You know, you get to the point where you sort of say to yourself, well, gee, another biography of Conan Doyle. You know, I'm going to hear about Dr. Budd and the whaling trip and Joseph Bell and this, that, and the other thing. But you do something completely, which has, I think, never been done before, which is you really take the reader back to looking over the shoulder of Conan Doyle. And your preface does it. You know, you're back in Bush Villas. You've got the smells. You've got the sights. You've got the sounds of young Conan Doyle writing, and you put the reader right there. And that's very much an extension of what you were just talking about with the personal Arthur and Sherlock kind of approach.
Oh, thank you. I really do want to, in these what I call biographical narratives, where I'm zooming in on a certain aspect of a person's life, I really want to not look ahead. The sources are there are end notes, there's endless reading, but that should be behind the scenes. And I really want to stay in the moment, because I always think these people didn't know they would wind up being famous. They were just like us. The suspense was they didn't even know if they would get through the day. And I want you to meet him when he's unsure about everything, from women to whether he'll make it in medicine or whether anyone's ever going to buy one of his short stories.
Yeah, you know, one of the anecdotes that stuck out to me, and you do a wonderful job of finding these anecdotes that even to the cynical and tried and true Sherlockian or Doylean are fairly new in concept. But the one that stood out to me was when he was a medical student and had to decide between paying for his meals or buying books. And he made a sacrifice every week to give up lunch to put it towards the used book bin that was out in front of the bookstore in the city. And who among us as book collectors or as voracious readers hasn't done something like that?
Yes, that was great fun for me. And I like Doyle's candor in that he admitted that about 4 days a week he would just do lunch. That he would wrestle with this every day as he walked by, and 4 days a week he would opt for food, as anyone would. And but roughly once a week he would go, okay, I'm just going to get something here. And when I learned what the bookshop was, and I went back and read newspaper sources from the era with details and texture about the bookshop, I just fell in love with that scene and who would come into the bookshop and what it looked like with all the big bewhiskered clerks up on their ladders trying to find obscure theological tomes. And I just love that kind of moment when all the dusty research can come alive and you kind of blow the dust off of it and bring it back.
Yeah.
How long have you been working on this? I mean, it seems to me it must have been years of research.
Well, I'm always doing a bunch of different projects, so I had been reading toward it for a while, I think, before I realized it. And then I would say really the composition of the book, though, was only about a year and a half. But great. I had been, like you guys and like other Sherlockian fans, in a sense, been reading toward it all my life, and just I'm slow to realize these things.
Now, when did you first encounter Sherlock Holmes?
I'm actually writing a little guest column about that for the Strand magazine this week to turn in. I ran across in a Goodwill store a few years ago, because I always check their bookshelves if I'm anywhere near one, a copy of the literary textbook for my middle school that I was at. And I opened it, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. It was my first encounter with Sherlock Holmes was in there. It was a very lushly illustrated, about 1970 lit textbook, and it was The Adventure of the Speckled Band. And so I was based on that, I was 11 or 12. And I had such a really sentimental moment of the golden glow of discovering childhood reading when I opened that book. And everybody else in there, is just trying to find a cheap chair. And I'm having a Proustian childhood rush over here, and somebody else is going, no, I can't wear a 38. Do you have a 36? That kind of thing.
Now, it wasn't too long after that, according to your talk, and we should note for our listeners, you gave the 2011 Baker Street Irregulars Distinguished Speaker Lecture during the BSI weekend, titled The Light of Reason. And for those interested enough to go and get a back issue of the Baker Street Journal, it's available in the summer 2011 edition. And in that, you recount how that interest that was sparked in that schoolhood text led to the request for an even larger volume. Care to talk about that?
Yes, that was a life-changing kind of moment. We lived in rural eastern Tennessee, and somewhere, there were no bookstores, there was a tiny library, but somewhere I learned that there were miraculous things called mail-order book clubs. And I immediately began using everything I could find. I created numerous fake memberships for all of my nieces and nephews so I could get their introductory volumes, and thus began a flourishing life of crime. And in doing that, I saw the annotated Sherlock Holmes, the 2-volume set by William S. Baring-Gould. And when it arrived, I sat up literally all night long. I was 15, I think, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. History was no longer opaque. The marginal notes, the photographs just sort of opened up literature and history for me. It really changed my life.
It really is.
It's funny you should mention that, because now that I think about it, I think I first got my 2-volume edition of Baring-Gould from the Literary Guild, because I was also a big subscriber of all of those things, Literary Guild and the Mystery Book Club and anything I could find.
Science Fiction Book Club.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine may have been from the Literary Guild. I don't know, because I also had them. And I would, get my minimum membership and cancel, and they would send me a renewal notice in the name of my niece, and and I would do it all over again.
That's great. Yeah. Did you have unlimited bookshelf space at home at the time?
No, a tiny house, but it didn't matter. I would just fill it with those mail order books. There were no bookstores, I'll bet, within 50 miles of where we lived when I was a kid.
Wow.
Which makes you think, for fanatical book people, it makes you think of W.C. Fields' line that, once I was on a trip in Afghanistan and we lost our corkscrew and had to live on food and water. That there's a book version of the same thing, a book lover's version.
So was a town library an option for you, or was that because of your circumstances? That something that was just out of reach?
We did. An uncle would take us into town, and later my older half brother would take us. And there was a tiny library, and there is no part of the history of humanity that I regard with more of a golden glow than the image of that tiny library. And it is now, the building is still there in my hometown. To imagine that it was once the library is almost funny, because it's just a very small cottage.
Wow.
But it was the key to the world, and the sunlight would slant in there through those dusty windows late in the afternoon, and I would go in and everything smelled like, the greatest smell in the world, book mold, and silverfish or whatever.
Yeah.
And I would discover Jim Kilgard, who wrote Big Red and those animal stories, and children's detective stories, and The Three Investigators, detective stories. To this day, any book that has the mystery of or the secret of in the title, I'm likely to at least pick up and consider.
That's wonderful. So when did you embark on a life of writing?
Well, I have no degrees of any kind, and so not even a bachelor's degree. So I really wanted to write a book about something about the intersection of natural history and cultural history, so kind of what we make up about nature, and also I had a mind full of details and anecdotes about natural history. And in my 30s, I, short version, sold it to Henry Holt via an agent, a wonderful agent, and I sold the idea. I presented a book of days format that I thought would get past the concern that I'd always read that publishers have of, okay, this writer has an idea, but can he finish the book? And this was like, I couldn't go astray. I just had to keep writing 500 to 800 word essays for the whole year. And it worked. And then I thought, now I can stand on this and as my resume and my footstool and reach for other things. And in response to that book, the editorial director of Penguin UK sent me a letter saying, hey, write something for me. And I've been typing ever since. That was 22 years ago this month.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And how did of all the things that you've done before now, what was the spark that got you to Conan Doyle and his life and his early days? Did it come from your Thoreau experience?
Actually, in writing the book about Thoreau, I discovered how much I enjoy conjuring the 19th century, and but also I had written somewhat about Sherlock Holmes even as early as my first book, Darwin's Orchestra, the Book of Days, because I write about Silver Blaze, I'd write about the snake that couldn't possibly have been a snake in Speckled Band, or all the many other ways that science and natural history go through the canon. And so then I would find that Sherlock Holmes would reappear in various other books over the years. And I kept thinking, I really would like to go down to the basics and the beginning and tell the story, as you and I have discussed earlier, without looking too far ahead. And I thought, well, while all the Sherlockian mania is going on, I really ought to do it now. And with my incredible professional timing, the book came out the week that the Sherlock series seems to have ended with an episode that made everyone angry, apparently. And
that could be any episode.
Yeah, well, yes, and the week that Trump was elected. So really, I have amazing timing on these things.
Yeah, that's a lot of foresight. How did you? What was the moment? I'm just fascinated because it's a bit like Frankenstein. I mean, you not you specifically, but there are these characters, Conan Doyle, that are written and covered in so many biographies. But there's a real spark in Arthur and Sherlock, where, as I said before, from page one, he's sort of there as a living character. And of course, as you said, you've been reading widely, so you've clearly read his journals and his letters to his mother and just an enormous amount of things. But at what point did you really feel that you had a sense of him as a character? Because it really does come through. It would be a crime to call the book a novelization of Conan Doyle, because it really isn't. It's sort of a synthesis of everything he's left behind, but beautifully organized and interpreted. And the details, I mean, everything from the fact that he's polishing his nameplate in his early days as a doctor in the evening because he doesn't want to be seen as someone who doesn't have a servant.
I love those things. Make it so real to me. But your question of when did I realize? It's been, I guess, 3 years ago that I really felt I had a sense of, not the definitive by any means, but my own particular vision of how certain tributaries in his life played into the creation of Holmes, and that I thought a slightly different way to do it. And Pamela Paul, the editor of the New York Times Book Review, interviewed me on their podcast, and she asked a very good question. Why did you think you had something new to add to a topic that seems to have been plowed to death? And I said, I just felt there were moments of drama and texture and beauty and resonance and poignant little details, or just sweet little details like polishing the brass nameplate, that I feel get left out of sometimes either a more academic approach or a biographer doing his entire life. Doyle was a very busy man for a very long time, and I feel like biographers are like Sisyphus. I mean, they've got to push that entire life all the way uphill ahead of them for 500 pages. And by focusing on the theme of what parts of Conan Doyle's life, real life and reading and his own psyche, played into the creation of Holmes, I felt like I was able to pause wherever I wanted to and let the camera zoom in and let you see him, I don't know, shaving or whatever. He's not famous. He's not known. He's just one of us.
Well, another marvelous thing you do in putting all this together too, and I think you mentioned this earlier, is really to bring alive this period of the late 19th century. So in addition to sort of looking at the world over Conan Doyle's shoulder, you have a sense of really what it's like to get up and have breakfast and move around, but also your searchlight, your authorial searchlight, plays beautifully over other characters in Conan Doyle's story that we think we know well, but you really bring to life in a remarkable way, particularly Joe Bell. You have got this, people have this great notion of Bell as the spark for Holmes, but you really give us Bell in enormous detail, including his physical appearance, his limp, his experiences with diphtheria, and the names, Michael, the names of his horses, Major and Minor. And the undercarriage of the carriage that Bell's mentor drove in and its color.
Yeah.
And I understand that for some people there may be a little too much vivid detail. when I give talks, I don't teach writing, but I give talks to colleges and various writing groups. And when I talk to students, I always say that really I just want it to be in an active voice, and I want it to be specific. And then there are moments, though, when you realize you can overdo that. But I feel like those kinds of things. If there's an aroma mentioned, an odor mentioned in the sources, what if I can work that in, and you have one more sense participating in that moment? But with Bell, I really felt that his physicality was very important because I think, in a sense, because Arthur Conan Doyle had so much trouble with his own father, Charles Doyle, and his alcoholism and his unreliability, it seemed to me that in 1876, when Doyle comes back and to Edinburgh and he begins medical school, he was primed for a father figure and some hero worship. And Bell was about 40, and it seems to me, in a sense, that he was almost becoming a character of fictional status years and years before the notion of turning him into a detective as Sherlock Holmes. And so part of that, I think, is the heroism. Like you mentioned, the diphtheria, that Bell had sucked mucus out of the throat of a suffering child and wound up, of course, with diphtheria of his own, which caused the limp, caused his incongruous, high-pitched voice. And I don't mean to go on about this. There's just one point about this that I think is key. The notion of modest heroism seems to me to play through Sherlock Holmes, that he's arrogant about his intelligence and his observational skill, but he doesn't talk about how he's really quite a heroic figure. And thank God he doesn't brag about that, too. And Doyle seems to me someone who, unlike every other mystery novelist I have read about or that I know personally in the world now, he didn't need to create a heroic alter ego. He was a very brave, courageous, strong man. So he created a different kind of alter ego intellectually. But the heroism was there, and I think in a sense he got a lot of that at the exactly right moment from Joseph Bell. And I didn't mean to go on and on and on.
No, not at all. You're not going on about it at all, because I think it's part of the what's really unique, distinctive, and beautifully successful in the book. There isn't too much detail in your book. It's exactly the right amount of detail to bring to life these people, particularly people that we think we know well. And, the sad part about being a Sherlockian is that as you continue to encounter these people in other media, you occasionally have experiences where you say, this isn't real. I mean, you watch a couple of hours of Arthur Conan Doyle on television, and it's an actor you respect wearing an Inverness cape, and clearly the producer wants him to look like Sherlock Holmes, and you look at your watch and you say, maybe I'll have a cup of tea instead. But this is it's just really remarkable. And the way you particularly bring Bell to life, in the way you describe his physicality, his analytical abilities, and I'm just touched and thrilled, frankly, by what you just mentioned about Holmes as the hero, because that's what seems to me to be lacking in so many, the modest heroism of Sherlock Holmes. I think you just described that very beautifully, and that seems to be lacking in a lot of interpretations. So I was...
Yeah, I think when you get Robert Downey Jr. bare-knuckle boxing and desperately searching through his pockets to find his accent...
Is that where it was? Oh.
I think it was in his overcoat pocket. You lose track, I think, of the original Holmes in some way. And, of course, people have varying fondness for the many interpretations. But the original one, I do feel, has a kind of affection for Watson and, again, modest heroism toward women in trouble, toward people who can't afford to pay him or whatever. And, for example, Holmes famously hurts Watson's feelings early in The Sign of the Four with the incident of interpreting the watch, what Watson hands it over. I'm sure every listener knows this. Hands over the watch and says, "Well, what can you learn about this?" And Holmes just goes on telling the story of, clearly this is an alcoholic who has been through a number of different periods in his life of trouble and rising up and falling down. And then when he realizes what he's done, he's quite apologetic. I think there are a lot of moments like that of, as Jeremy Brett, I think, does beautifully in the BBC series, in the Grenada series, that there's arrogance and confidence, but then underneath there is a strong element of he's simply not a jackass. He's not villainous. He's not mean to people. He's occasionally contemptuous of someone's intellectual shortcomings at a certain moment, but he's underneath a figure to respect, I think.
Yeah. And I think,
and a hero.
Yeah, that's true. And I think a lot of that comes from a sense of impatience. That there are those that simply can't keep up with him, and his faculties are working at such a pace that he's consistently outpacing everyone else. And
yes.
I think with Bell, what's interesting with Bell is, Bell was a teacher. He was required to slow down. He was required to make sure that his students kept pace with him, yet still was able to completely baffle and wow them in certain settings.
Yes, and to do it in ways that later fed straight into the Holmes stories. Like, one of the students the students were required to do their own diagnosis and to take a shot at it with people, with patients who came in, and Bell would be very quick to go, "No, for Pete's sake, doesn't have foot disease." A version of, "What kind of idiot are you? Now look at these clues," and that kind of impatient, confidence teaching, I think, had a huge impact on Doyle himself, who was less of a blusterer, but he could see how beautifully it could play into drama. And also, it was fun for me in reading other students' accounts of Bell, that he too would keep his main clue to the very end. He would say, "Well, look at the calluses. We'll look at this. We'll look at that. Well, he's wearing he's a boatman, but it's not a marine thing. It's a coastal outfit, and also you can smell fish, or whatever." He would save a key clue until the very last moment, and that seemed to frustrate some of his students. And then later, you can imagine Watson riding along in a carriage with Holmes, and Holmes is holding out. He's giving little bitty snippets, and you can imagine Holmes wanting Watson banging his head against the wall of the carriage. It's a wonder there's not a line in there somewhere, "For God's sake, Holmes, just tell me the bottom line."
Well, we're just going to take a quick break here and have a quick word from one of our sponsors. The Baker Street Journal is billed as an irregular quarterly of Sherlockiana, but it reaches beyond Sherlock Holmes. It reaches to the world of collectors, to the work of illustrators, and even to the life of Sherlock Holmes' creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. We've been chatting with Michael Sims, one of the latest biographers of Conan Doyle, whose book Arthur and Sherlock is currently making the rounds. But Michael first came to the pages of the BSJ through his lecture at the BSI Distinguished Speaker event in 2011 at the BSI Weekend. His speech, updated for print, is available in Volume 1, Number 3, the Summer 2011 edition of the Baker Street Journal. Even if you can't attend the BSI Weekend in New York each year, you can always count on the Baker Street Journal to deliver the lecture to you in an issue quickly following. It's the only place where you can read what the likes of Madeline Stern, Bert Cools, Nicholas Meyer, Laurie R. King, Michael Dierda, and more said to the assembled masses. Make sure you don't miss the text of Sarah Paretsky's talk from January 2017. It'll be in the spring issue of the BSJ, which you can get by subscribing at BakerStreetJournal.com today.
Well, you also do something. You also report something that I had not encountered before, which is how much Bell perhaps may have owed to his own mentor, which I found very interesting.
Yeah.
I read in obituaries and memoirs about Bell that he modestly claimed that he got a lot of that from James Syme, his own mentor. And the commentators claimed that they had never seen that to the level Bell claimed, that they felt it was just Bell being too modest. So I found that interesting. I did not find anywhere accounts of Syme behaving in this way that Bell did. Now, I did, and this was fascinating to me, it was wonderful to discover that Bell was part of a diagnostic movement at the time, and von Hebra in Austria and Vienna was doing this with very little medical technology. They were emphasizing that very precise, detailed observation of the patient in front of you from the moment they walk in is the key to diagnosis. And I loved learning that various people were doing this.
Yeah.
Besides Bell.
Yeah. Now, I want to remain on this notion of modesty for a moment, because of course we know that Holmes famously says in the Greek Interpreter, "I cannot agree with those who rank modesty among the virtues." And at the same time, there are some contemporary accounts of Conan Doyle very much acknowledging that Bell was a part of the inspiration for the character, and the press then turning to Bell and basically asking for his input on the matter, his opinion, and him being very, very modest about it, very demure, saying, no, this is more Conan Doyle than it is Joseph Bell. How much do you think that modest attitude was worked into that particular remark and the rest of the character?
Very interesting. I don't know. I think part of the fun of these kinds of things, when you can look at a whole life after it's over, I mean, it's so weird that these people have died and we're still, such a long time later going over their lives. But part of the fun is you can see their contradictions, just as all my own contradictions and vices and faults are visible to everyone else more than they are to me already, and except to my wife who points them out to me. But I think that with Doyle, that with both Doyle and Bell, they wanted to be modest, and they felt they ought to be modest, and they genuinely had an urge in that direction. But at the same time, both were somewhat adept at what is now called humble brag. And I think Bell was being very modest and very genuine about it, and then he said, however, let me tell you what I did actually do. And then the next thing you know, he's writing an article about it. And then he's appearing somewhere else telling about it. And so he got really caught up in it. He enjoyed it. He was very proud to have been the inspiration. He genuinely seems to have liked Doyle and thought well of him, the young Arthur. And Conan Doyle was the same way, I think, in that even in letters to his mother or family, there's a lot of bragging of what I'm up to and what I've accomplished and things like this. But the official version ought to be more calm and polite. And so I think Doyle wanted, this is just entirely, of course, just my impression and my opinion. He wanted modesty about certain accomplishments to be part of Sherlock Holmes, like the heroism, the strength, the famous straightening up of the poker from the fireplace in
Speckled Band,
I think.
Yeah.
Grimsby Royal, yeah. And I think he wanted that to be part of the character. But at the same time, he seems clearly to me to have found the arrogance, the intellectual arrogance, amusing. And I think he was very right. It's very entertaining. Watson, the long-suffering Watson, poking little pins in Sherlock's arrogance, and Holmes tweaking Watson in return, I think play with the whole notion of confidence and arrogance and modesty throughout. And I think it seems to me that that's in part because those were sort of big issues in Doyle's own psyche. How much confidence should manifest itself, and at what point does it become arrogance? And I think that's an issue for anyone who's trying to be an accomplished person in the world.
Mm. Well, you say that very well, and also you present an aspect of Conan Doyle's personality that I had not focused on in all of the things that I've read about him, which is that particularly up through his sort of early adulthood, he really was a rather violent, a rather reckless, a rather angry in several ways man.
Yes, I think he very understandably had a certain volatility, and he writes about at different times and in his other novels a bit about the more autobiographical early novels about how nervous women could make him at times. He's clearly manifesting a desire all the time to show himself as strong, robust, masculine in his sense and the era's sense, and address how to be a man in the world. He seems to me to be dealing with frustrations and angers about his father and about his upbringing and about poverty, relative poverty, and all these factors. And he seems to be trying to figure out how to play this role of a man in the world and what it means to be a gentleman. And my father died when I was 3, and I've known a number of friends who had alcoholic fathers or mothers and have watched their attempt to navigate early adulthood without role models. And that seems to me part of what he was doing in his life. He's casting about for a way to do this. And I think, in a sense, that's why Bell may have had such an impact on him, that he was legendary for being a perfect gentleman, for a kind of professional modesty underneath a kind of teaching bravado, that he and theatrical, but underneath a good person and not actually an arrogant person.
You know, I thought of, when I was reading this, I thought of, oddly enough, someone I never thought of in the past at all in parallel to Conan Doyle, and that was Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes. I think those are, that image occurred to me. I didn't weave it in because it was going to be a little later. It was one of those, didn't want to look ahead too much. Mm-hmm. It seems in a retrospective analysis very relevant, but it didn't fit into the tone of my narrative. But it seemed like there's some, you read a biography of Teddy Roosevelt and you can like many, many things about him and still perceive that if he's going off on a trip, he's going to make sure to take along a cameraman. And just like any professional person, you're going to want, like now, you know, it's very cute. You see, who's a famous actor? Like Jennifer Lawrence, a famous young actress. You see her meeting Meryl Streep, and she's desperate to get a selfie with her. And I think everybody wants. We all have a persona in mind up to a point, and it's half just happening and half being nudged and created. And I think Conan Doyle was, as you point out, doing that somewhat in the manner of Teddy Roosevelt, that he was very passionate about his convictions, of a good person, and yet at the same time he would like to make sure you are aware of that.
Yeah. Well, but also, you know, Conan Doyle, perhaps like T.R., created himself out of necessity. You know, TR was asthmatic and weak and became this sort of extreme, extroverted, outdoors, you know, and this whole issue of how did people get to be the way they are, you know, has occupied so many people's attention. I mean, the director Bill Condon, you know, tends to focus on character studies like this. He did that film years ago about how did Holmes really get to be this way.
Yes, and that is the ultimate question with a biography or any kind of narrative is like, what is the motivation? And I think that's what movies so often get wrong, or kind of a lot of pop fiction. They act as if there's just a conviction. This person is just a Russian spy.
Right.
When he's a Russian spy who loves his kids and secretly reads softcore porn or whatever, you know, and he's troubled by flat feet and indigestion. It's just the three-dimensionality and complexity, and that's part of what I think is making people say that my book reads somewhat like a novel, is I'm trying not to analyze, I'm trying to just show what I can confirm from the sources, Doyle himself and the many other sources, the actions, the thoughts, the dialogue, as much dialogue as possible, rather than analyzing. And I think that makes it feel perhaps a little more present and emotional.
I would agree. And speaking of sources, one of the things that I had seen in a number of reviews and a number of commentaries online was something I had actually never heard before. And I've been at this since I was 14 years old. Of course, we've all heard that the original names for Holmes and Watson were Sharonford Holmes and Ormond Sacker. There's that famous one-sheeter there of the notes that Conan Doyle was putting together for A Study in Scarlet as he was determining how to bring these characters together, bring them to life. You said that the original name before Sharonford Holmes was Sherringford Hope. And we know Hope was used later on for Jefferson Hope in A Study in Scarlet. But where did you find the reference for Sherringford Hope?
What's fun with this kind of specialized interview is the level of understanding of and context for the topic, and that you've read the book to death. You know, you need to get new copies because clearly you've underlined the bookmark. One of the surprising sources in the book for researching the book was a wonderful interview that he did with Bram Stoker, who had not yet published Dracula. It was a few years before Dracula. And he was still the assistant to Henry Irving, the great actor, and he was a journalist. And so he interviewed Doyle, and in the interview, he mentions this early title, and I felt, well, if you can't trust the author himself, and this was early on too, it wasn't reminiscing for the autobiography in 1927. This was about 1892, right after, maybe 93, right after the success of the first run of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes in the Strand. And so I thought, well, this is all so recent. I feel confident in trusting this source that he said this himself. So that was really fun. Those kinds of weird little details, like the number of, as Sherlockians know, the countless many possible sources for the name Sherlock. It was fun discovering in newspapers of the era just how many that Doyle might be reading on any given day about two different Inspector Sherlocks who worked for the Metropolitan Police Force in London and whose adventures and exploits and possibly memoirs and casebook were recounted in the daily press. And then Sheridan Lefnu, the wonderful horror writer, ghost story writer, had a character named Carmel Sherlock, and just so many things besides ones that he'd read about in Macaulay and so on and on and on. So it's just so fun finding those details, like the Bram Stoker article, the interview.
Yeah, it was a wonderful little detail, one I had wondered about. So I thank you for that. Now, I want to read an excerpt here. It's actually from the very last chapter. It's the very last paragraph of the very last chapter. And don't worry, folks, there's no spoilers here. I think we all know how this turns out. The chapter is...
How does it end, Scott? How does it end?
Well,
I was doing this with my book about E.B. White, and I said, okay, a spoiler, the bug died.
Well, that actually brings up a good point. Before we get to this paragraph, you could have continued this book for another 10 to 20 years in Conan Doyle's life, and still had us in the palm of your hand. Why did you decide to end it at the time period that you did?
I really felt that it was about the creation of the character, and so I took you through both the first 2 novels and the first dozen short stories. And the short stories did some tweaking of the character and things like this, but it seemed like to end on the moment when he's at his first big triumph, Sherlock is becoming a household name, but also, in general, the character is worked out. He's in place. And so I decided to end it at the moment at which Conan Doyle publicly thanks the real-world inspiration for it. And it seemed to me, if I open in the middle of a conversation with Bell at Edinburgh University Medical School and go full circle and keep Bell in the story and keep the influence, their interactions, and bring it back and sort of end on that tonic note, that it seemed to me a complete narrative about the creation of Holmes before we got on to other things. Also, if you go much farther, you get into the complexity of he soon kills him off at the end of the second dozen stories, and you get Tui's, his wife's tuberculosis diagnosis, and you get into a number of things that I felt I wanted to end on a moment of triumph and a moment where it seemed like the character was finished in creation.
Well, that's very fair.
Of course, that's entirely arbitrary. I mean, everyone, about 3 reviewers have suggested other possible times I could have ended the book.
Well, if anything, it leaves you room for a sequel, right?
Yes, exactly.
So let's get to that excerpt, and then I'll circle back with one more comment. There was a letter from fellow Edinburgh resident Robert Louis Stevenson, fellow author. And Stevenson wrote to Conan Doyle April 5th, 1893, and you note about his letter, it blended the praise of a reader and the condescension of a rival. And Stevenson ended his letter with a question that harkened back to his own studies at Edinburgh Medical School. Only the one thing troubles me. Can this be my old friend Joe Bell? I'm so glad Sherlock Holmes helped to pass an hour for you, replied Arthur on May 30th. He's a bastard between Joe Bell and Poe's Monsieur Dupin, much diluted. Stevenson could see through Holmes to the inspiration behind, and he knew from visceral personal experience the mountains of paper and rivers of ink that a writer must exhaust before reaching success. But he could not have known how much affection, experience, admiration, and debt were distilled into Arthur's words for the dedication on the first page of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Although he was only 33 when he penned the brief tribute, Arthur well understood his own journey, from racing up the wide infirmary staircases in Edinburgh to peering anxiously through wooden blinds at Bush Villas in Southsea, to being applauded by George Newnes and Greenough Smith as they, Sherlock Holmes and the Strand, soared to fame. Sherlock Holmes had bought Arthur's home and enabled him to bring his sister Connie home from Portugal. So in the front of the book that brought him such freedom and acclaim, Arthur inscribed simply, "To my old teacher, Joseph Bell, M.D., etc., of 2 Melville Crescent, Edinburgh." And there we have the end. And so So there's this great book ending, as you say, of Joseph Bell. Could the book just as easily have been titled Arthur and Joseph?
I actually thought about that kind of thing, and I felt that the other factors were strong enough that there was a lot more to the creation of Holmes than just Bell. I really spent a long time unraveling the potential ways, the many different ways that Arthur Conan Doyle was influenced by Edgar Allan Poe, for example, about the Monsieur Dupin, at what he would have learned at which time and at what point to tell the reader each part of it. And so I think with Poe's contribution, Bell's contribution, and I hope, clear ways in which aspects of Doyle's own character played right into the creation of Holmes, that those three strands are woven together. But the inspiration, as opposed to the creation, really seems to have been all started with Bell. And it later, I think, sort of cross-fertilized in his mind with Poe. So I wanted Bell, the real Bell, I wanted to end on that moment. Also, in part because it's a generous, collegial thing to publicly thank someone when you're in the middle of a lot of fame like that.
Mm. And, you know, your description there of the threads being woven together, I think that's the sign of a great creative genius. And from my own personal experience, you know, I worked for Ford Motor Company for a number of years. And Henry Ford, of course, is always credited with the invention of the moving assembly line. And while that may be true with regard to automobiles, the fact is he visited textile mills, and he visited meat processing plants in Cincinnati, and he looked at how they did things and how they had some assembly lines involved there. And he wove these strands together to create something that was right for what he needed to accomplish. And in very much the same way, you've just described Doyle as being inspired by something, seeing another example, and then finding a way to blend it and work and make himself look like an even bigger genius than the two giants whose shoulders he was already standing on.
And I think there's a Poe line that I wish I had. Of course, you know, everything is in retrospect, you think, oh, I could have done this differently. But I wish I had put this there, that Poe talks about that creation, inspiration and creation are ultimately a process of combining. And I like the notion of looking at inspiration and creation. I'm doing that now with the young Charles Darwin, with E.B. White in the earlier one or whatever. The notion of what are these two things and how do they work together. So it had to be, for me, the various inspirations play into then the process of creation. Because once you get the idea and once you have become, in a sense, conscious of the ways in which things are influencing you, for example, he didn't walk around every day thinking about how Poe had influenced his notions of detectives. And I don't think he realized how Bell had become a character in his mind until he walks off the page reincarnated as Sherlock Holmes. But that process interests me so much. In a sense, what sparks my own creativity and desire to create by combining is unraveling other people's process of inspiration and then creation. And how they differ, and how the beautiful spontaneous combustion of you've got your inspiration, you begin creating, and then new inspirations and creations occur that you would not have foreseen even 2 sentences earlier because it comes alive on the page. And in this conversation that we've had today, there are analogies and references and cross-indexing that we could not have predicted, that they just emerged from the tone of our conversation, and which to me is part of what makes conversation often seem very a creative, exciting process when you get, a bunch of nerdy enthusiasts on the same project.
Hey, who are you calling enthusiasts?
Who are you calling
like
a bunch?
Like you would protest being called that. We know our tribe.
Yes, we do. We do indeed. Well, and Arthur and Sherlock. The book, Arthur and Sherlock, Conan Doyle and the Creation of Holmes by Michael Sims. It's available from Bloomsbury, wherever books are sold, online and off. Just as you can tell, we can't say enough good things about this book and the style and Michael's fine insights in writing. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Michael.
Thank you very much. I've been looking forward to this and proud to have been invited.
What a delightful conversation.
Sometimes that happens. Happily, it happens more often than not here. We just make a connection with the person we're talking to, and you have the feeling that we could just go on and on and on and on and on and on for hours. I mean, it was
I thought we did.
It was really a wow.
We didn't do that. we didn't go on and on and on.
Only seems like it. But what a I'm still struck by the book, which is really terrific, and by the conversation. I mean, we have so many things in common, which I guess is not surprising. When you think about this literarily focused community and the importance of literature in all of our lives and storytelling and how much we admire Holmes. But boy, oh boy, this is good conversation.
I have to tell you, I really admire Michael's style of writing. This ability to look at different events and weave a thread through them and figure out the emotional connection and perhaps even some of the conversations that took place. I initially, when the book came out, I really had no interest in reading it, just by virtue of knowing it was, yet another Conan Doyle biography. But, reading some of the reviews, and then, of course, reading the book, and then finally hearing Michael talk about it, well, it all comes together. And, if you haven't picked up a copy of the book yet, and you've heard this conversation with Michael now, what are you waiting for? I mean, this is just it's really a unique style of biography. I really, really enjoyed his style.
Yeah, and we must probably we'll have a link on the site for they'll take us to Amazon if you want to click through our site.
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, it'll take you to all those places.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things really. The problem is as soon as we're done with the interview, there were always more things I wish that we had talked about, and maybe there'll be future conversations. We'll have an opportunity to do more with Michael. But one of the things that occurred to me is, it's frequently commented, and I guess maybe we'll get to this in trifles, that Holmes, you would have made an actor and a rare one. But that is precisely the gift that you mentioned. When you say that Michael does such a great job in this different approach to biography or creating a character, when you're an actor, you really want the backstory. You want those little details that you can put together into creating a persona, to create a character that you can then, stay in consistently. And that is, usually when you talk about Holmes and acting, it becomes disguises and putty noses and things like that. But it's that assembly of details that Michael mastered so well in putting this book together and in doing an immense amount of research. And the other thing I wish we'd talked about is his writing process, because, John McPhee in The New Yorker is known for doing this extensive writing process and reducing everything to small facts that can then be moved around and assembled. I think he uses a giant table to do all this. And I'm curious exactly how physically Michael managed to assimilate and put all this stuff together.
That's a really good point.
2 years of stuff.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, there must be some kind of note-taking process or layout or map room with things tacked on the wall and things like that. The bibliography runs, 11 pages.
Oh, yeah. Now, see, that's another thing I wish we'd talked about, because that's a great – there are two things I wanted to mention after the conversation. One was the fact that some of the reviews were quite good, which are great, but I think some of the reviews, people just didn't get it. They looked at the book and they said, well, if only he hadn't stopped. Well, the whole point of the book was Conan Doyle and the creation of Sherlock Holmes. It wasn't, Arthur Conan Doyle's life with Sherlock Holmes. So it's a mystery to me that people would look at the book and sort of not get it. But the second thing, the notes and the bibliography are a reason to buy the book, because when you look at the chapters, you see what he's done is he's provided an enormous amount of context and quotation and source data for virtually every observation in the book.
Yeah.
So if you're annoyed, as sometimes I am, by reading books that mention, Joe Bell did this and Joe Bell did that, and you've got no idea where that fact came from.
How do you know that? Yeah.
Yeah, where that fact came from and how you can look it up. Not so with this book, because Michael will show you, the longitude and latitude of virtually every item in the book. So just the notes in the bibliography are fabulous.
My only criticism on that point is that while the notes themselves are very clear, and they include the phrase that is being referred to, like his annual income would rise to £1,000 on chapter 11. It doesn't tell you what page it's from, nor does does that phrase in chapter 11 have any kind of super to it to note that there's going to be a note.
Oh, right.
So that's my only regret, is that there's not something in there that says, note 12, go look at the back of the book.
Yeah, that's true. Well, one of the things that Lancelyn Green did well, or was it Dudley Edwards in the Oxford series of the adventures, was that link between references in the text to notes that could be found in the back of the book. I think the problem, though, with Michael's book is that if he did that, the whole page would be covered with asterisks.
Yeah, could be. Of course, the inspiration for that might be the Baring-Gould or Klinger annotated, where they number it rather than asterisk. So either way, it doesn't certainly doesn't detract from the book at all. But well worth a read.
Friends, it's spring, but how can you enjoy the changing of the seasons and still follow your beloved literary characters? That's why you need the new Sherlock Holmes brand Baker Street Herb Garden. Our hand-painted stoneware model of the Baker Street sitting room is a cleverly designed planter that will infuse your kitchen and cuisine with the flavors of fresh organic herbs. You'll be growing in no time with our 5 custom seed packets, including Mycroft marjoram, Reichenbach rosemary, second stain sage, porlock, parsley, and twisted thyme. It's the only indoor-outdoor planter that delivers the 3 C's. Carefully cultivated Cruciferi. And for our first 50 customers, a free packet of our special Rathbone basil. All waiting for you at your local Sherlock Holmes brand retailer today.
Always sterling advice from our friends at the Sherlock Holmes brand.
I think they're planning an initial public offering soon. I think the market is so robust that...
I'll have to check with the stockbroker's clerk.
Yes.
Hall Pycroft is heading up that IPO, I hear. Well, I think we've headed up as much as we can here. Friends, please don't forget, leave us a rating or review on whatever sound system you listen to us on, whether it's iTunes or Google Play or what have you. Please let people know what you think of the show. And let us know as well with a comment, either via the phone, 774-221-7323, or in some form of writing, either electronic, physical, or maybe even telepathic.
Spirit writing.
Have we opened up the Ouija board for comments yet?
Well, that planchette just keeps hopping around on its own. It's very disturbing.
Well, that's because it drinks Red Bull. Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Yes. Well, after you get around to doing that, we will finally be allowed to say, this is Scott Monty.
Yes, and that's Scott Monty. And I suppose I'm still Burt Wolner. And here we are, and there we go.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
When I read, I love this when I was reading Conan Doyle's letter to the British Medical Journal about his self-poisoning with gelsemium.
Yeah.
The key details, I mean, they were beautiful little details, but, one of them, he ends it with this note of bravado for a 20-year-old or whatever, that he could have taken a lot more of this poison had it not been for the diarrhea. And, and you just think, sadly, these are the kinds of details that bring it to life.
Yeah. I'm sure you found that too. I mean, every time I start to poison myself, I find that I could take an enormous amount of that stuff, except for those minor inconveniences, like spending a lot of time in the bathroom.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you think he never talked very much about what some of the problems were with doctors he was working with, but you think, he might not get a letter of recommendation from the doctor with whom he was working when he was spending a huge amount of time self-poisoning and perched on the chamber pot instead of helping patients. You think, it's these are the details that also kind of hint at areas that remained buttoned up in the autobiography.
Yeah, yeah.
I just love this kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's great.
And with E.B. White, I wrote a book about him, and I loved finding out things like he was scared to death. He was bullied at school, and he would go blocks out of his way to avoid being even picked on verbally from someone's yard. But he would go swimming at night in rivers alone. And you think the things that we are afraid of or not afraid of are just crazy.